Hi, it's Rob from Cumulus Cycles. In this AWS Hands-On tutorial, I'll show you how to use AWS Glue to run an ETL job against data in an S3 bucket, then save the transform data in another S3 bucket, and finally use AWS Athena to query the data. AWS Glue and Athena are often combined to create a serverless ETL, or extract, transform, and load process you can use to manage data from multiple data sources, create a repository of that data, and then query the transformed data. These services come together to crawl through the data in a data lake, say S3 using Glue, populate tables with the data, or metadata on the data. Then Athena can be used to query the data in the tables. For the demos in this video, the data I'll be using comes from the World Health Organization, and to get it, I'll click the data link on the home page, then access the COVID-19 dashboard, and then click the data link in the menu. From here, I'll expand the data download section, and then grab the link to the CSV file for the latest reported cases and deaths. I'll copy that, then go to an online CSV to JSON converter and load the file. Then I'll download the result to my local computer. And the reason I'm doing this conversion up front is to show you how we can start with JSON data and then do the ETL and then produce a CSV file as the output. Finally, I'll open the JSON file in VS Code and delete the opening and closing array brackets and save the file. Then we can jump over to the AWS console and get started with Glue. First off, I'll go to the IAM dashboard and create a new role to use in the Glue process. So I'll click on Roles, Create Role, search for Glue, then select to allow Glue to call AWS services on my behalf. I'll click Next, and for the demo, I'll give the role Power User Access and give it a name, and then create the role. Now I'll jump over to S3 and create buckets for our input data, output data, and for the Glue script. Now I'll go into the COVID input data bucket and upload the JSON file with the data. Now we can head over to the Glue dashboard and get started. In the first demo, I'll start by creating a Glue database, then a crawler, and finally a Glue job to perform the ETL against the JSON data. So I'll click Database, Add Database, give it a name, and create the database. Now I'll go ahead and add a crawler. So create crawler, give it a name. I'll leave the default not yet selected to indicate that my data is not already mapped to Glue tables, and I'll add a data source. So the data source will be S3, the location of data is in this account, and then I'll browse for the bucket. I'll select the input data bucket, add a slash, and then add the S3 data source. Click Next. And for IAM role, I'll choose the COVID role that I created earlier. Click Next. And then select the COVID DB for the target database. Click Next, then Review, and create the crawler. Now from here, I'll select the crawler and run it. And we see the state is stopping and that one table has been created. Now with the crawler complete and a status of succeeded, we could jump over to the tables and we see our new COVID input data table with a classification of JSON. And if we open the table, we'll see the schema which matches the structure of our JSON data. Now with the crawler tested, we can create a glue job which will extract the data into the output data bucket in S3. So to get started, I'll click Jobs. I'll leave the default to create the job with a visual source and target, and then create the job. And I'll start by adding a source, which will be the Glue data catalog. I'll choose a database and a table, and then add an action. And the action I want to add is to change a schema. And for the transform, I'll drop some of the columns. And then add a target, which will be an S3 bucket. We'll change the output format to CSV, compression type to gzip, and then select the target location, which will be the COVID output data bucket. Then I'll go to the job details, give the job a name, select the IAM role. I'll leave the job type as Spark with the default Glue version and Python 3 for the language. I'll keep the default number of workers at 10. And then under Advanced Properties, I'll change the script path to point to the COVID scripts bucket. I'll take the rest of the defaults and then save the job. Oh, and it looks like I made a mistake when specifying the bucket for the script, so let me go back and fix that. And add the slash. And save again. And now I'll go ahead and run the job. While the job's running, I want to jump into the script tab in the job editor. And you'll see that Glue generated a script to run against the mappings for our schema. Which is pretty cool because we didn't have to write the script ourselves. It's generating it based on the schema from the input we provided, the metadata in the table, and the output that we want to be produced. So now I'll switch over to monitoring. We see I have one running job, which will take a while. So I'll pause the video here and restart when the job finishes. Okay, so we see the job succeeded. So now we could jump over to S3, go into the output bucket, and we see our output file. Now, in full transparency, although this is a gzip file, it took me several executions of the job to get it to be zipped. So if I go back to Glue Studio and I look at the job execution, it actually took me 6 runs before it saved the file in a compressed format. And I honestly don't know why, if I click on jobs and I go back to the job and I click on the data target bucket, it wasn't saving the compression type. Even though I would change it to gzip and save, and it said it was saved successfully, whenever I ran the execution, it was saving the file in an uncompressed mode. Now, you see when I go back to the output bucket that this time it's compressed, but in the Glue Studio editor, when I just showed you the data target bucket, even though the job had saved and ran successfully, it was showing a compression type of none. So I just wanted to point this out in case you run into this issue as well. If I figure out why this is happening, I'll post another video explaining the issue. But as you can see, I wasn't able to figure it out even after 6 runs. In any event, let's jump back to the bucket, download the file, I'll uncompress it, give it a CSV extension, and then open the file. And here we see the data. And if I open it with VS Code, we'll see the CSV format. Now, in that first demo, I walked you through the process of manually creating the database before the crawler and the job. In the next demo, we'll start with the crawler first. So let me do a bit of cleanup so that we can start with a clean Glue environment. First, I'm going to go ahead and delete the job. Then I'll delete the crawler. Then the table. And the database. I also want to jump back into S3. I'll empty the output data bucket and a COVID scripts bucket. And of course, we still have our input file in the COVID input bucket. Now, back in Glue, I'll go ahead and create a crawler. Give it a name. Add a data source, which will be the COVID input data bucket again. Add the slash, and add the data source. Click Next. Choose the COVID IAM role. Next. And here we have to choose our target database. And because I deleted the database that I created in the last demo, I'll go ahead and add it here. And create the database. Now refresh. Select the database. Next, review, and create the crawler. So now I'll go ahead and select the crawler and run it. And with the crawler complete, we'll go back to the database, click into it, access the table, and confirm the metadata schema. Okay, now we'll jump back into Glue Studio and recreate our Glue job. So similar to before, we'll create a new job from a blank graph, specify the source, which is the Glue data catalog, choose the database and the table, select an action to change the schema and drop the columns that we don't want again, then add the target, which is the S3 bucket, the format CSV. We'll cross our fingers on the compression type and set the target location, which is the output data bucket. This time I'll add the slash and enter the job details. Give it a name, select the IAM role, and under Advanced Properties, I'll set the script path to the COVID scripts bucket. Then save the job and run it. Again, we see the generated script, and we'll jump over to monitoring and wait for the job to finish. All right, and now that the job has successfully completed, we'll jump back over to S3, go into the output data bucket, and this time we see we get the zipped file right from the beginning. So we'll go ahead and click it, download it, extract it, give it a CSV extension, and open it. And we see the data as expected. In this final demo, I'll show you how to use Athena to query data after it's transformed using Glue. To start, I've cleaned up the Glue environment as I did before in the last demo and created new S3 buckets. In the input data bucket, I've simply added a CSV file which I downloaded from the WHO's COVID data dashboard. Now I'll jump over to the Glue console and create a crawler to generate the data catalog metadata table. So I'll give the crawler a name, add a data source, which will be the COVID input data bucket, add the slash, and add the data source. I'll select my IAM role and add a database. Then review and create the crawler. Now I'll go ahead and run the crawler. Now with the crawler succeeded, I could jump over to the table, go into the COVID input data table, and we see our schema. And from here, under Actions, I can click View Data, which will launch us into Athena. And when the page loads, it's executed a query to select everything from the data catalog. And we see our results below. Now, one thing I want to point out is that in order for the query to run successfully, you'll need to go into Settings, click Manage, and then add the S3 bucket to store the query results, which in S3 was the COVID data query results bucket that I created. And if we click into it now, we'll see the results of our execution. And now if we jump back over to Athena, we could modify our query. And this time I want to select all the data from the catalog where the new cases and new deaths are greater than 0. So I'll go ahead and run this. And we see our results. And I can download, then open the file locally. And now we have our transformed and filtered results from Athena. Now, if we switch back to Athena, we'll see that in addition to new cases and new deaths, we also have cumulative cases and cumulative deaths. So instead of carrying that data over into Athena and then having to run a query to filter on it, what I'd like to do is create a job that will just output the data for new cases and new deaths. Then we can take that output, pull it into Athena, and then build a query to further filter the resultant data. So I'll jump over into the Glue console and create a new job. So I've jumped into job details and I've given the job a name. I've selected the IAM role, and in advanced properties, I added the path to the COVID scripts folder. Now I'll jump back into the visual editor. I'll add a source, which will be the S3 bucket that contains the input file. The data format's a CSV, and it specified the delimiter, and indicated that the first line of the source file contains the column headers. Now I'll add an action to change the schema and remove the cumulative cases and cumulative death columns. And finally add a target, which would be the S3 bucket for the COVID output data. Now I'll go ahead and save the job and run it. Now that the job has succeeded, I could jump into S3, go into the output data folder, and download the file. I'll give it a CSV extension and open it. And now we see our transformed data that only has new cases and new deaths. Now back in the Glue console, I want to create a new crawler to use that transformed data. I'll add the data source, which this time is the COVID output data bucket. Select the IAM role, select the database, then review and create the crawler. Now I'll go ahead and select the crawler and run it. Now with the crawler complete, I'll jump back into the tables, select the COVID output data table. We see our updated schema, and now I can view the data in Athena. And here's the updated data running against the new schema. And we can update the query to further filter the results, and of course download if we'd like. So that concludes this video on using AWS Glue and Athena. If you found this useful, feel free to give it a like. And if you'd like to be notified when I add more content to my channel, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.